Rain beat softly against the narrow windows of the roadside inn, its rhythm blending with the low hum of the old vending machine at the end of the hall. A faint smell of detergent lingered in the air, mingling with the bitter scent of coffee. Drifting from the small front desk, most guests had already settled in for the night. The lights in the hallway flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows across the faded carpet. Ethan Cole walked slowly, his hands tucked into the pockets of a worn jacket, the brim of his cap shadowing his face. To anyone passing by, he looked like an ordinary maintenance worker, someone hired to fix leaky faucets or change out dim light bulbs. In reality, he was the founder and CEO of one of the country's fastest-growing hotel chains, and tonight, he wasn't here to check ledgers or meet executives. He was here to see the truth. For months, Ethan had been hearing conflicting reports about the smaller budget properties his company owned. On paper, things looked fine: clean rooms, decent service, satisfied guests. But he'd learned long ago that numbers could hide what eyes refused to see. So once every few months, he would take off the tailored suits, put away his expensive watch, and slip quietly into one of his own hotels as an ordinary worker. Tonight was supposed to be routine: a simple walk-through, a few quiet repairs, maybe a conversation with the night clerk. But halfway down the dim hallway, a sound reached his ears that didn't belong. It was faint at first, almost drowned by the steady hum of the building. Then it grew clearer, a soft splashing, followed by the swish of fabric against fabric. Curiosity pulled him toward the far end of the hall. He passed two closed doors and rounded a corner into the laundry room. The sight stopped him cold. A young woman stood at the deep metal sink, her sleeves pushed up past her elbows. She worked with a slow, deliberate rhythm, scrubbing a small pair of jeans in the soapy water. The fluorescent light above flickered once, catching in her hair and revealing tired lines under her eyes. On the counter beside her sat a tiny shirt, damp and wrinkled from being washed by hand. In the corner, a little boy sat on a chair far too big for him. His small legs swung back and forth, not quite touching the floor. His head kept drooping to one side before he jerked it back up, fighting to stay awake. Every now and then, the woman would glance at him and smile faintly, murmuring something Ethan couldn't hear over the steady swish of the water. Ethan stood there for a few seconds, unsure if he should speak. Something about the scene felt too personal, like stepping into someone else's memory. Finally, he cleared his throat gently. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of him, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Ethan gestured toward the far corner of the room. "There are machines over there," he said softly. "They'll do the washing for you." She hesitated, then gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "They take coins," she replied, her voice low. "I don't have enough left after getting dinner for my son." She glanced at the boy, who was now leaning forward, his chin resting on his hands. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. The machines cost only a few quarters, yet here she was, washing everything by hand late at night. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 2 weeks, she said after a pause. "Just until I can figure things out." Her words were steady, but Ethan could hear the exhaustion behind them. She didn't explain what things meant, and he didn't press. Something told him her story was long and not meant to be spilled to strangers. In the middle of a laundry room, he noticed her hands red from the hot water, the skin near her knuckles roughened. He wanted to say something comforting, something that would take away the strain in her expression, but nothing felt right. Instead, he nodded toward the small pile of clothes. "I can help," he said quietly. She shook her head quickly. "We're almost done. Thank you, though." The boy looked up then, his sleepy eyes studying Ethan. "Do you fix things here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he replied. "Why?" "My toy car's wheel broke," the boy murmured, holding up a small blue car missing one of its plastic wheels. "Mama says it's okay." But he trailed off, glancing at her. Ethan crouched down, taking the toy gently. "I'll see what I can do," he said. The woman gave him a cautious look but didn't stop him. There was something in her eyes, hesitation, but also the faintest flicker of hope. Ethan wasn't sure why, but he felt a pull in his chest. The Kind he rarely felt in boardrooms or during high-stakes deals. As he worked on the toy, he asked, "What's your name?" "Maya," she said after a moment. "And this is Adam." "Maya and Adam," Ethan repeated softly, as if committing the names to memory. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows. The old vending machine down the hall hummed on, oblivious. Somewhere in the building, a TV played faintly behind a closed door. But in the laundry room, time felt slower, quieter. When Ethan handed the toy back to Adam, the boy's face lit up just enough to make the dim room feel warmer. Maya gave a small nod of thanks, then turned back to the sink, rinsing the jeans with careful hands. Ethan didn't know why he stayed leaning against the wall, watching her work. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, tired but determined, or maybe it was the thought of her quietly doing all this while the rest of the world slept. He didn't know her story yet, but something told him it was worth hearing. And as he stood there, unnoticed by most, Ethan realized that tonight wasn't going to be routine at all. Something had shifted. This wasn't just about checking his hotels anymore. It was about the woman at the sink, the boy with the broken toy, and a feeling in his chest he couldn't quite name yet. The storm outside had slowed to a steady drizzle by the time Ethan finished his quiet patrol of the hotel. He told himself he should head back to the small maintenance room he was using as his cover. But something about that laundry room scene refused to leave his thoughts. The image of Maya, sleeves rolled up, red hands working in the sink, and Adam's sleepy eyes watching her, it lingered like an unanswered question. He walked back toward the front desk, keeping his head down so the clerk wouldn't think much of him. The man behind the counter was busy scrolling through his phone, barely glancing up when Ethan passed. It was clear that here, in this small corner of his company, guests were mostly left to fend for themselves. Instead of going to his room, Ethan found himself drifting outside into the cool, damp air. The parking lot smelled of rain on asphalt. He stood for a moment under the awning, watching cars pass on the highway beyond. Then movement caught his eye. Through one of the side windows, he could see Maya and Adam returning to their room, the boy clutching his small blue car in one hand and his mother's fingers in the other. Their room was on the ground floor, 2 doors down from the ice machine. He told himself it wasn't his place to get involved. He was here to observe, not interfere. But the truth was, Ethan had never been good at standing by when someone was clearly struggling. That impulse, the one that had driven him to start the company in the first place, was stirring again. An hour later, unable to sleep, he walked the hallway again. Most doors were quiet, but faint voices and laughter came from a room down the hall where a group of traveling workers were staying. When he reached Maya's door, he paused. The light was still on inside. Through the thin curtain, he could see her moving about the small room. Adam was curled up on one of the beds, fast asleep. Ethan kept walking, but the thought gnawed at him. Why was she here? Why was she spending 2 weeks in a budget hotel instead of a home? What had happened to bring her to this point? The next evening, fate gave him the answer, or at least the beginning of one. Maya came into the small lobby carrying a grocery bag. The handles had stretched so much from the weight that they were cutting into her fingers. She stopped at the coffee station, poured hot water into a paper cup, and slipped a tea bag into it. Ethan, wearing his maintenance cap, was replacing a bulb in the corner. She noticed him and gave a polite nod. He nodded back, then asked quietly, "How's Adam's car holding up?" Her lips curved just slightly. "Still running." She shifted the bag in her arms, and he noticed it wasn't filled with groceries, exactly, more like simple staples. A loaf of bread, a small jar of peanut butter, 2 apples, a pack of instant noodles. "You walked to the store?" he asked. "Yeah, it's only a mile," she said, as if that explained everything. He hesitated, then said, "If you need a ride next time, I've got an old truck out back. I can." She cut him off gently. "That's kind, but we're fine." Her tone was polite, but it carried that edge people use when they've had to rely on themselves for too long. He didn't push. Instead, he asked, "Been staying here the whole time?" "Yes," she said, setting the tea down. "It's complicated." She glanced toward the hallway as if checking to see if Adam might wander in. "We had to leave our last place quickly. I didn't have anywhere else lined up." Ethan's mind filled in the blanks. Rent to high, maybe a landlord who didn't care, maybe worse. He'd heard these stories before, but they never felt distant when you saw the people living them. That night, while making his usual walk around the property, he saw Maya sitting outside her room on the small plastic chair. Adam was asleep inside, and she was looking up at the night sky, a paper cup of tea cooling in her hands. Without thinking, Ethan walked over. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She shrugged. "Sure." They sat in silence for a while, the distant hum of traffic filling the gaps. Finally, she said, "You ever feel like you're stuck in a place you didn't plan to be? Like you took a wrong turn somewhere, and now you're just trying to get back?" He looked at her, but she kept her eyes on the sky. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "More times than I can count." She gave a short, soft laugh. "I doubt that. It's true," he said. "You don't build something from scratch without getting lost a few times." That made her glance at him. "You build things?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Sometimes hotels," he said vaguely, not wanting to reveal who he was. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were trying to figure him out. "Well, maybe you can give me some advice. I'm trying to build something too, a life for Adam. But every time I think I'm getting ahead, something happens to knock me back down." She shook her head. "Feels like I'm always starting over." Ethan wanted to tell her that starting over wasn't failure, it was proof of resilience. But he knew words alone wouldn't change her reality. What she needed was something more tangible. The conversation lingered with him long after he went back to his room, and as he lay in bed, listening to the rain start up again, a thought took root in his mind. Maybe he could do something more than just listen. The following day, he found a quiet way to test the waters while checking the vending machines in the hallway near her room. He left a few coins on the counter in the laundry area, enough to run the washers and dryers several times over. He said nothing, just walked away. That evening, he passed by again and saw her using the machine. She didn't see him, but he noticed her glancing at the coins, then looking around the room with a faint smile. She didn't pocket the extras, just used what she needed, leaving the rest neatly stacked for someone else. That small act told him more about her character than anything she'd said, and it made him certain that this wasn't going to be the last time. He found a reason to cross paths with her. Something was unfolding here, something that went beyond a CEO checking on his business. Ethan didn't know yet where it would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. Maya's story wasn't finished, and neither was his part in it. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of damp asphalt from the night's light rain. Ethan was already up before sunrise, moving quietly through the hotel's service corridors. The property was still, except for the soft hum of the old heating system. He'd decided the night before that today wouldn't be like the others. Today, he'd stop letting chance decide. When he crossed paths with Maya and Adam, he found himself outside their room just as the first blush of daylight reached over the horizon. The curtains were drawn, but through the thin wall, he could hear the muffled sound of a child's laughter, quick, light bursts followed by Maya's voice. Calm and patient, it was a comforting sound in a place that often felt transient and cold. By the time he saw them later that morning, they were walking toward the lobby. Adam clutched the little blue car in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. Ethan was fixing the coffee machine near the entrance when they passed. Maya nodded politely, but Adam stopped in his tracks. "Look," the boy said, holding up the paper. It was a crude drawing of the toy car, done in bright crayon colors. "I drew it 'cause you fixed it." Ethan smiled. "You did a great job. Looks fast." Adam grinned, then ran to catch up with his mother, who gave Ethan a small smile before continuing to the breakfast area. It was nothing more than a counter with a toaster, a waffle maker, and a few cereal dispensers. Ethan watched as Maya poured a small amount of cereal for Adam, then quietly skipped making anything for herself. Something inside him shifted again. He could see it. She was rationing, making sure Adam had enough while she went without. It was the kind of quiet sacrifice that most people didn't notice, but it spoke volumes. A plan began forming in his mind. It had to be subtle. She was proud, and anything that felt like charity might make her retreat. So he started small. That afternoon, he arranged for a tray of fresh fruit and sandwiches to be accidentally left in the staff break room near the laundry area. He knew she came there to wash clothes. Sure enough, an hour later, he passed by and saw her hesitating by the tray. Adam was perched on the edge of a chair, eyeing the strawberries. Maya glanced around, then took one sandwich and a small handful of fruit, clearly torn between need and caution. She offered the first bite to Adam before taking any for herself. Ethan kept walking, pretending not to notice, but inside, he felt something deeper than satisfaction. It was relief. Relief that she had accepted even that small gesture. The days that followed became a quiet game of timing and observation. He learned their routines: when she left for the store, when Adam napped, when she sat outside at night with her tea. And each day, he found a small way to make things just a little easier without drawing attention to himself. One evening, just as the sky was fading to deep purple, he found her sitting on the bench near the side entrance, a worn paperback in her lap. Adam was running in slow circles around the patch of grass, pretending the blue car was racing across invisible roads. "Nice night," Ethan said as he approached. "It is," she replied, closing the book slightly. "Feels quiet." "In a good way." He nodded, then asked, What are you reading?" She hesitated before showing him the cover. It was a second-hand copy of a parenting guide, its spine creased and pages dog-eared. "Picked it up at the thrift store," she said lightly. "Figured I could use all the help I can get." He didn't comment on that, but instead asked, "Adam seems happy." "That's the goal," she said, her tone softening. Then, after a pause, "Even if it means I'm holding everything else together with tape." Ethan studied her face for a moment, the way her eyes shifted when she spoke about herself, the way her fingers tightened slightly on the book. He wanted to ask what had happened before she came here, but he knew she wasn't ready to tell him. Instead, he said, "Tape's stronger than people think. Holds until you can replace it with something better." She smiled faintly at that, but her gaze drifted toward Adam, who was now lying on the grass, looking up at the first few stars. The next morning, Ethan overheard something that made him pause. He was in the supply room when the front desk clerk took a call. The man's tone shifted to a low, dismissive mutter. "Yeah, she's still here," the clerk said into the phone. "The single mom with the kid. I don't know. She's paying week to week. Guess she's not leaving anytime soon." Ethan felt a flare of irritation. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, the quiet judgment. This was his property, his staff, and this was not the way he wanted people treated. Later that day, he made sure to run into Maya in the hallway. She was carrying a small bag of groceries. Adam walking beside her. "Hey," he said casually, "if you ever need anything fixed in your room, just let me know. I'm around most evenings." She gave him a curious look. "You seem different from the other staff here." "How so?" he asked. "You actually notice things," she said simply. That night, Ethan sat in his truck in the far corner of the parking lot, watching the lights in their room flicker out one by one. He knew he was getting too involved, but it didn't matter. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about checking on his business. It was about making sure that Maya and Adam got through whatever this was without losing hope. And though he didn't know it yet, the next few days would bring a turn that would force him to step out from behind the role he was playing and into something far more real. The wind had picked up overnight, rattling the loose gutter outside Ethan's room. By morning, the air was sharp with the scent of rain-soaked pavement, and low clouds hung heavy over the parking lot. He woke earlier than usual, uneasy, as if something was already off. That feeling only deepened when he stepped into the hallway and saw the front desk clerk speaking in a hushed but urgent tone on the phone. The man's eyes flicked toward Ethan for a second before he turned away, lowering his voice even more. Ethan didn't catch the full conversation, but he heard one word clearly: eviction. His stomach tightened. The call ended, and the clerk began typing something into the computer with quick, deliberate taps. Ethan walked past slowly, glancing at the monitor. He caught a glimpse of a room number he recognized: Maya's. By the time he made his way toward the side entrance, he saw her standing outside, her hair pulled back hastily, her shoulders tight. Adam was beside her, holding a small plastic bag, with his toothbrush sticking out of it. The sight of that bag made something sink in Ethan's chest. "You're leaving?" he asked, keeping his tone even. Maya looked at him for a moment before answering. "Apparently, we can't stay unless I pay for another week right now. And I can't. Not today." Her voice was calm, but her hands clenched the straps of the worn backpack on her shoulder. Ethan glanced at Adam, who was staring down at his shoes. "Where will you go?" he asked quietly. "I'll figure it out," she said, trying to sound certain. "I always do." The words were meant to close the conversation, but they didn't sit right with him. He'd seen that look before, the one people wore when they were holding it together for someone else's sake, even as everything around them was falling apart. A thought flickered through his mind. He could walk into the front office right now, pay for their room himself, and end this. But he knew Maya. If she realized the money came from him, she might refuse it. Pride wasn't a flaw, it was the one thing that had probably kept her standing this long. So he decided on another way. "Hang on here a minute," he said. "I might be able to talk to someone." She frowned slightly, but didn't stop him. Ethan walked back to the front desk, where the clerk barely looked up. "What's going on with room 107? Ethan asked. The clerk shrugged. "She's late on payment. Policy says." "I know what the policy says," Ethan interrupted, keeping his voice calm. "But maybe give her until the end of the day." "Not my call," the clerk said. Turning back to his screen, "Owner sets the rules." Ethan resisted the urge to laugh at the irony. Instead, he stepped outside, where Maya was waiting. "You've got a little time," he said. "Maybe I can help you find something else." Her shoulders eased just slightly. "Thanks, but we'll be okay." He wanted to argue, but before he could, Adam tugged at her hand. "Mama, can we go to the park?" She glanced at the cloudy sky for a bit, she said, then looked at Ethan. "Thanks again." He watched them walk away toward the small park across the street, the boys' laughter faint in the breeze. Something in him hardened then. He wasn't going to stand by and let them end up sleeping in a car, or worse not, when he could do something about it. Later that afternoon, while the clerk was on break, Ethan used the back office phone to make a call. Within minutes, he had extended the payment on room 107 for another week, marking it as covered by a guest assistance fund that didn't actually exist until today. He left no paper trail linking it to himself. When Maya returned, she stopped at the front desk. Ethan, pretending to fix a flickering light in the lobby, watched as the clerk informed her that the payment had been handled. Her brow furrowed in confusion. "Someone covered it?" she asked. "That's what it says," the clerk replied. Clearly uninterested, she didn't press, just murmured a quiet thank you before taking Adam's hand and heading down the hall. That night, Ethan saw her outside again, sitting on the same bench with her tea. This time, she seemed less guarded. "Strange day?" he asked, walking over. "You could say that," she replied. "It's not every day a week's worth of rent just appears." She looked at him directly, her eyes sharp but not accusing. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Ethan kept his expression neutral. "Sounds like someone wanted to help." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment. Then she let it go. "Well, whoever it was, I'm grateful." She sipped her tea, then added softly, "It's nice to know there are still people out there who care." The words struck him more deeply than he expected. He realized then that this wasn't about fixing a broken toy or leaving a few coins in the laundry room anymore. This was about making sure she never felt alone in the fight she was in. But he also knew the clock was ticking. A week wasn't much time. If he wanted to truly help, he'd have to find a way to step out from behind his cover without breaking the trust she was just beginning to give him. He didn't know how yet, but he could feel it coming. Something was going to happen soon, something that would force the truth into the open. And when it did, he could only hope she wouldn't see his help as pity, but as the start of something neither of them had planned for. The week passed faster than either of them expected. Rain gave way to crisp, golden mornings, and Adam had taken to waving at Ethan whenever he saw him in the hallway, his small hand lifting in quick, shy bursts. Maya still kept her guard up, but something in her demeanor had softened. She smiled more often, small, fleeting smiles, but enough to hint that some of the weight she carried might have shifted. If only a little. Ethan had been quietly working, behind the scenes, pulling strings without drawing attention. He'd made sure Adam had breakfast waiting in the lobby each morning, courtesy of an anonymous guest donation, and had arranged for a local thrift store to accidentally drop off a box of warm clothes at the hotel, which ended up outside Maya's door. She never said it outright, but he could tell she suspected him. Still, she didn't push for answers, and he didn't offer them on the last day of her extended stay. The sky was unnervingly clear. No rain, no wine, just stillness. Ethan woke up with the uneasy sense that something was about to break. That feeling deepened when he walked past the lobby and saw two men in dark jackets, standing at the desk, talking to the clerk. Their voices were low, but their posture was stiff, official. One of them glanced toward the hallway where Maya's room was located. He slowed his pace, pretending to check the light fixture above him. The clerk handed the men a clipboard, and one of them signed before they both moved toward room 107, Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He followed them at a distance until they stopped at her door. A sharp knock echoed down the hall. Maya opened it moments later, surprise flickering across her face. Adam peered out from behind her. Double quotes, Ms. Reynolds? One of the men asked. His voice clipped. Yes, she replied cautiously. We're here regarding an outstanding balance from your previous apartment complex, he said. We've been asked to collect payment or arrange alternative resolutions today. Ethan caught the way her shoulders tensed. I told them I'd pay once I found steady work, she said, her voice calm but strained. I'm afraid that arrangement is no longer acceptable, the man said, his tone cool. If you're unable to pay, we have to notify certain agencies, which may affect your ability to. That's enough, Ethan said, stepping forward. The men turned to him, frowning. Sir, this is a private matter. Maybe, but it's happening in my hallway, and I work here, he said evenly. Give us a minute. Maya's eyes widened slightly. Ethan, it's fine, he assured her. Then he turned to the men. Wait in the lobby. I'll bring you what you need. They hesitated, but eventually walked away, clearly annoyed. As soon as they were out of earshot, Maya exhaled sharply. You didn't have to get involved. Too late, he said. How much are we talking about? She looked away. More than I can handle right now, but I'll figure it out. The phrase hit him like a repeat echo from the day she nearly got evicted. He realized this was the moment to stop pretending he was just a maintenance worker with good intentions. He took a breath. Maya, I'm not who you think I am. Her gaze snapped back to him, confusion knitting her brow. I'm not just fixing lights and unclogging drains, he continued. I'm Ethan Cole. I run the company that owns this hotel, and about 50 others. Silence stretched between them. Adam, sensing the tension, clung to her side. She shook her head slightly, almost laughing in disbelief. Why would you pretend to be someone else? Because I needed to see things for myself, he said. I've been working undercover in some of my locations. I wanted to know how people are treated, not just guests, but the ones who don't have the money, the ones barely holding on. And then I met you. Her expression shifted from shock to guarded skepticism. So what, this was some kind of charity project? No, he said firmly. It was never about pity. It's about respect. You've been fighting to keep your son safe, to keep moving forward when most people would have given up. That's not something I'm here to fix. It's something I want to stand beside. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any trace of insincerity. Then her gaze softened just slightly. And the rent, the clothes, that was you. He didn't deny it. I wasn't sure how else to help without crossing a line. But right now, I can make this debt disappear today and give you the chance you deserve. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Adam tugged at her hand, looking between them. Mama, can we stay here? He asked quietly. Maya's throat worked as she swallowed hard. Finally, she looked back at Ethan. If I say yes, what's the catch? There isn't one, he said. Except maybe letting me believe in you as much as you've been believing in yourself. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the vending machine down the hall. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right, she said, her voice steady. We'll take the help, but I'm paying it forward one day. His smile was small but certain. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. As he walked toward the lobby to settle things with the two men, Ethan realized the truth. He had started this undercover journey to understand his business better, but what he had found was far more valuable. He had found a story worth being, part of a story that wasn't just hers anymore, but theirs, and he had the feeling the most important chapter was still to come. Snowflakes drifted lazily outside the hotel window, catching in the faint orange glow of the streetlights. It had been 3 weeks since that day in the hallway. 3 weeks since Ethan had stepped out of the shadows of his disguise and into the open. Maya had agreed to let him cover the debt, but she hadn't simply stayed at the hotel doing nothing. Every morning, she was up early, dressed neatly, her hair pulled back, Adam's little backpack slung over her shoulder. She walked him to a nearby community center for morning programs, then headed to the hotel's cafe, where she'd taken a temporary position serving coffee and pastries. Ethan had kept his distance at first, not wanting to overwhelm her, but he watched from the edges as she learned the job quickly, smiled more often, and began to carry herself with a new kind of energy, like someone finally stepping into sunlight after years of rain. Adam seemed lighter too. He made friends at the center, learned how to write his name in bold, uneven letters, and would run to Ethan in the lobby with small victories to share. One crisp afternoon, Ethan invited Maya to a meeting at the company's downtown office. She hesitated, but curiosity eventually won. The elevator ride was quiet. When the doors opened, she stepped into a floor of glass walls and warm lighting. Staff bustled between desks, and a wall-sized display showed photos from the company's charitable programs, food drives, housing projects, scholarship recipients. Ethan guided her toward a conference room with wide windows overlooking the city. "I wanted you to see this," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "This is what I've been building, not just hotels, but opportunities. We have a program that hires and trains people who've been through hard times, single parents, veterans, people starting over. It's not charity, it's work, dignified, meaningful work." She listened carefully, her hands folded on the table. "Why show me this?" "Because I think you belong here," he said, "not just as an employee, but as a leader, someone who understands struggle, but also what it means to keep going." Her brow furrowed. "Ethan, I've only been working in the cafe for a few weeks, and you've been managing life alone for years," he countered. "That's harder than anything we can train. The rest you'll learn. I'll make sure of it." She looked down at her hands, then out the window at the endless rows of rooftops and streets. "It feels too big," she admitted. "Good," he said simply, "if it doesn't scare you a little. It's not worth doing." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was full of possibility. Finally, she lifted her gaze, and there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "All right, where do we start?" In the weeks that followed, Maya stepped into a training program designed for management roles. It wasn't easy. There were nights she studied after putting Adam to bed, mornings she battled self-doubt, days she worried she was in over her head. But Ethan was there, sometimes in person, sometimes with just a text or an encouraging note left on her desk reminding her that she belonged. By spring, she was leading a small team at one of the company's newer locations. Adam had a stable home for the first time in years, his own little room with space for the toy cars he loved, and on weekends, they'd take the bus into the city to explore museums, parks, and bookshops. One Saturday, after a long morning of errands, they ended up at the company's annual community event. Families gathered in the park, music floated on the breeze, and volunteers handed out hot meals. Ethan was there, moving through the crowd with the ease of someone who knew everyone. When he spotted them, he smiled, a real, unguarded smile. Maya walked over, Adam skipping ahead to greet him. "You two made it," Ethan said warmly. "Wouldn't miss it," she replied. They stood side by side, watching a group of kids chase each other near the stage. "You know," Ethan said after a pause, 3 months ago, you were washing clothes in a sink, wondering how to make it to the next day. And now, look at you." She followed his gaze toward the team she now led, staff members who laughed and moved with a confidence she'd helped nurture. "I didn't get here alone," she said softly. "No." He agreed. But you're the one who walked through every door. The afternoon stretched on, filled with music and conversation. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because life was suddenly perfect, but because she'd proven to herself that she could survive the storm and still step into the light. That night, as she tucked Adam into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mama," he murmured. "We're gonna be okay now, right?" She brushed the hair from his forehead, her throat tightening. "Yeah, sweetheart," she whispered. "We're gonna be more than okay, in another part of town." Ethan sat in his office, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. He thought about all the people he'd met during his undercover journey, all the stories of resilience and quiet strength. But this one, Maya and Adams, was the one that would stay with him forever. And somewhere deep down, he knew it wasn't really the end. It was only the beginning of a story worth telling. Again and again,